Welcome back to the M Wit & Hour YouTube channel, the home of album reviews, discography guides and think pieces. Now today's review is a review of the brand new Sabaton album called The War to End All Wars. Now as you may be able to guess, Sabaton is a band who came in my direction by way of my good buddy Gallagher, who has introduced me to a number of bands in recent years. However, none that I've enjoyed more than Sabaton, because to me, while I do definitely like their kind of almost 80s retro style take on arena rock, you know, the kind of classic chugging riffs with a very anthemic feel to them, yet with the kind of 80s synths going on in the background, which I think was a quite interesting sound. Obviously, they have the niche of pretty much all of their songs being documents of actual historical events, which on paper sounds unbelievably corny, I know, but it's actually a niche that I do very much appreciate, because a lot of my friends are quite big history buffs, and so I guess it was nice to actually have a stable conversation with them, which was nice, which came, if anything, by way of Sabaton's music. But I also knew that it was a niche ripe for artistic exploitation, because if there is any subject that you could do a very weird, odd, grand, kind of very conceptual concept album about, it would be actual historical events that have taken place over the course of humanity. And Sabaton, I think, do that very, very well on their past albums, specifically The Last Stand, which particularly seemed very militant and kind of precise. It had a very kind of deliberate approach, which I definitely appreciated. So going into this new album, I had no reason to have any skepticism, besides the fact that maybe I could say that I wouldn't entirely appreciate Sabaton's sound for a whole album's worth of songs, just because it can come across a little one-dimensional at times, but that was one of my only real problems with it. I mean, I guess it could get kind of corny at times, but there really was no great, there was no huge amount of skepticism going into it, is what I will say. So, I sat down, and here is what I thought of Sabaton's brand new album, The War to End All Wars. The opener called Sarajevo, which before I go on to review, I just want to say that the way this song exists is very strange, because you can only find it either on YouTube or principally by buying the physical version of the album, because this song isn't on streaming, right? Which I find very strange, because surely if you're going to leave any song off of the streaming version, surely it would be like deluxe bonus tracks on the end, not the first opening song on the album that explains the entire concept, or at least kickstarts the concept, which this track does fairly well, because this one is all about the bells and whistles, which normally on albums like, say, the new Powerwolf album, I might have some problems with, but I think Sabaton do it with a minor amount of hiccups here, because I do very much like the grandiose sound that this track goes for, because you can really tell that it's trying to make a statement, whether it's the very kind of grand, kind of epic sounding marching drums in the intro, or the addition of a spoken word voiceover artist who kind of takes you through the instigation of World War I with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I think that's the right person, and I think the way they do it, although it might seem a bit tacky to some people, I actually think it is very well done. And of course this verse transitions into the kind of classic Sabaton group vocal affair, which I actually think works very well as a contrast with the spoken word vocals here. Other highlights are that I do quite like some of the faster parts in the bridge. I do think they're very energetic, very lively, and I also think the addition of a kind of almost innuendo-esque Queen guitar solo here is also very welcome, although that's not to say that this track doesn't have its minor hiccups, and they are only really minor. And the only real thing that I can pick out is that personally, I would have liked it if instead of having the spoken word for both verses, they had the spoken word start it off, maybe kind of do the whole story in a bit more of a concise way, or at least do the first part of the story in spoken word, then after the chorus, transition to the singing in the second verse. I just think that having the spoken word in both verses kind of takes a bit of the specialness out of it, because for me, the spoken word in the intro really lent it this kind of grand, kind of, oh, they don't normally do this, you know, that kind of excitement, but having it as the second verse here as well kind of takes some of that away. But for the most part, it does a very good job of an opener, despite the fact that you can't really find it, which is a real shame to me. The second track is called Stormtroopers, which is decent, but also kind of odd in a weird way, which I'll get onto in a minute, because it's not a bad track by any means. It is a pretty quintessential Sabaton track, I will give you that. It's got pretty much everything here, the quintessential dramatic opening, the fast pace, the soaring riffs, the gravelly vocals, the breakneck drums. It's all here, and they try to go for the more dramatic chorus here. But that, I think, is where my problem lies, because like I said, it's a decent song in pretty much every capacity. Like, the riffs are there, the vocals are there, the drums are there, everything's nothing's out of place. It just feels like this track doesn't seem to have that extra something to give it to the next level, if you know what I mean. Like, something feels either a bit off or like something's missing. Maybe the production feels a bit duller. I mean, I don't know. Like, tracks like The Last Stand, off of The Last Stand, feel a lot like grander or like shinier than this. I don't really know what the word is, but it just kind of feels a little bit like dull or flat or something. Like, it's not reinventing the wheel, and so I suppose that might be why. Like, it's kind of doing the same thing that I've heard Sabaton do over and over, just in a bit of a duller capacity, which is a real shame, because some of the riffs here and some of the vocals are actually quite good. It just feels like there's that one thing missing where I kind of go, there should be something extra here, but there just isn't. So it leaves it feeling equally dull and also frustrating. I guess it just doesn't have the same bombast that the other tracks do, I think is maybe the word I'm looking for, but I'm not really sure how they would fix that. I mean, maybe add a few more grandiose synths, or maybe again make the production a bit more open, I suppose, because the production does feel a little bit kind of claustrophobic-ish. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it doesn't quite have that grand scope that maybe some of their other tracks do sonically, so maybe it's that, but I'm really not sure. I know this isn't exactly the best review commentary, but I'm trying my best. Track number 3 is Dreadnoughts, and it's definitely a marked improvement, because for starters, I do quite like the combination of the kind of dramatic orchestral synth stabs with the guitar riff in the intro, which has that very kind of foreboding, dark, sort of almost militaristic effect, which I'm sure is what they were going for, given the kind of vibe of themselves overall. And I do think the whole track has a very slow, again, militaristic pace that it builds off of very, very well. I do think as well that in the chorus, the main riff in the chorus is very, very good. I think, like, it's not the heaviest riff in the world, but it does still have a decent amount of heft and especially hummability as well. Like, this is a very kind of catchy sounding riff, and I think in the verses there is some very nice subtle synthesizer work going on that I can definitely appreciate. And I think as well in the chorus and the pre-chorus as well, the vocalist is very, very solid here. Like, I'd even go as far as to say this might be my favourite chorus on the whole album. There's just something about it. It's kind of grand and catchy, yet also dark and kind of odd in a weird way that I can't quite place, but I don't think I have to, because I still really, really like it. And again, I think it's one of the more oddly catchy moments on here that maybe they weren't thinking is going to be one of the catchiest moments, but to me it kind of is. Although for whatever reason, again, I think it is probably a production thing looking at it now, it does kind of suffer from the same problem that the last track had, of feeling a little bit flat, especially in the verses. I mean, to be fair, the slow pace in general doesn't really help, and I guess just that the verse in itself kind of feels slightly bare doesn't help with that either, but it does still feel a bit flat in places, although I have to say that is definitely lessened in the chorus because of its dramatic presentation. But it's not exactly the most like sparkly or bombastic, or I'm not quite sure what the word is, but you get what I mean. The next track is called The Unkillable Soldier, and is a slightly strange one because it's a track that definitely has the drama and the ambition and the bombast going for it, but not really the amount of catchy ideas to back it up. Because while I do like a lot of the bells and whistles of this song, like, it's another really classic group vocal intro with a very nice backing choir, obviously those classic power metal riffs and drums, all of which when it comes together do actually sound quite lively. And I also do really like the choral bridge on here, which I think sounds incredibly, almost spine-chilling in a way. Like, it's very kind of, I don't know what it is about some choirs, but I mean, I suppose it's the thing with power metal in general. A lot of the choirs on a lot of power metal stuff is quite powerful, I suppose you could say. And there is also another decent guitar solo on here as well. But aside from the kind of more bombastic elements, when you actually strip the track down to, okay, is it a good track at its base, there's not really anything to dig into here. Like, the riffs are fairly standard, the drums are fairly standard, the vocals in the verse aren't really doing anything that screams catchy. Like, it's not really the most memorable vocal performance from the lead vocalist here, and the chorus is very, very odd, because it has this very kind of off-putting staccato delivery, which is kind of awkward and a bit low impact, because it doesn't really scream sing-along, again, kind of like the verse, where there's nothing really that you can latch onto, because it's just kind of a bit staccato and weird. And I do think that in the last chorus, especially when the lead vocalist joins in on the chorus, it is a little bit over the top. And that's another thing. As much as I do enjoy the kind of more bombastic elements of this track, it does go a little bit over the top, I would say. So while I do like some of the ideas here, it doesn't quite have the track at the base to back it up, really. And I do think maybe sometimes it goes a little over the top. So I'm kind of left in the middle a bit on this one. Track 5 is the lead single called Soldier of Heaven, and for me, the way I would describe it is, it's Sabaton's usual type, like my favourite type of Sabaton song normally, done slightly worse, I would say, because while it definitely does still have that very catchy, anthemic, bombastic chorus that for me is a hallmark of their best stuff, there are a few parts of this track that I think maybe miss the mark slightly, because to start with the verses, I do think that this is one of those verses, at least the first one, where it's one of those I don't like, where the only function it serves really is to build up to the chorus. I think Enter Shikari are maybe the biggest victims of this on their most recent album, but it's kind of, there's not really much going on in the verse besides like some synths and a very sparse drum beat and some vocals just to build up to the chorus. I mean, granted, there are some very nice bursts of kind of guitar and strings and vocals in the first verse that I do like a lot, and in the second verse it is kind of fixed, but still that kind of sake of a verse just to build up to the chorus thing is kind of a bit of a pet peeve of mine, if you would say. I do also think that the kind of Tron style synths that go throughout the song are a little bit tacky sounding. I definitely would have preferred the kind of more classic 80s style brassy ones that they normally go for, and I also think that the addition of a kind of electronic 80s drum fill is maybe, it doesn't exactly help its case, is what I'm saying. And I have to say, like, the guitar solos are getting a little bit tired already. Like, I know that guitar solos just as a format aren't exactly going to be like the most diverse thing in the world, but like I mentioned in the first track with the kind of, or maybe it was the second with the very kind of Queen-esque innuendo kind of solo, they seem to all kind of have that similar vibe. I mean, maybe that's just because I like innuendo and that's the only kind of like reference point I have for it, but they are starting to sound a little bit similar, which I knew was kind of an inevitability, but it shows more here than anywhere else. So while I do like certain elements of this track, particularly the chorus, which I think is very strong, I just think a few of the decisions that were made with this song are a little bit odd, like whether it's the tacky synths or the kind of odd structure that it goes for with the kind of very minimal verse that doesn't work very well. There's just a few things that maybe were a bit of a misstep here. The next track is called Hellfighters, and is one that is pretty good, to be honest. Like I said, this is probably one of my favourites so far, actually, because the riffs and the grooves on here are easily the heaviest so far on this entire album. Like, the riffs are absolutely incredible on this. Like, they do have that very gnarled feel that maybe a few of Sabaton's riffs kind of lack that extra kind of toughness to them, whereas these definitely have that bite to them that you really want on like a heavier track from this style. And I think that the drums are absolutely going at breakneck speed here, which I love, and the kind of more dramatic flair of the vocals and the subtle synth in the instrumental really help to complement it, because normally if the vocals go a little too overboard on a heavy track like this, it can kind of take away from that heaviness, but I think here it does a lot to kind of enhance it rather than take away from it, which I do quite like. My only real issue here, because this track is pretty flawless all things considered, like a really heavy, nice instrumental with a decent amount of drama to it. My only real problem is that there's not really a great shift in energy or tone or really much of anything between the verse and the chorus. So it just kind of goes in one long line for 4 and a bit minutes without much fluctuation in terms of, again, energy or speed or pace or mood. Like, it just kind of stays in the same place, which is maybe a bit of a letdown, although, like, the stuff that's here is already great. It's just that maybe I would have liked for maybe a bit more kind of a bit more dynamic range, if you like the highs, the lows, like not just kind of staying in one place. But to be fair, I'm not complaining all too much, because what's here is pretty great already. The next track is called Race to the Sea, and is honestly the first track on here that just feels like a blatant copy and paste job. Like, there is literally nothing about this track that is definably itself, if you get what I mean. Like, at least there was like a few definable qualities in all of the other tracks where I can kind of go, yeah, it is slightly one-dimensional, but it's got this, and this going for it, so I can kind of let it off. Whereas here, there's literally nothing. Like, it's just the same mid-paced kind of heavy riffs, the slow drums, the minimal verse, the dramatic chorus, the 80s brassy synths that go along in the chorus, the kind of Queenish guitar solos, the gruff, like, gravelly vocals. Like, there's absolutely nothing about this track that warrants me listening to it again, just because it is so samey. Like, I knew that I would maybe have this issue going into a Sabaton album, that it would start repeating itself, but I swear to God, this is just a blatant copy and paste of, like, pretty much every other song of this style in their discography. Like, pretty much take the Tron synths off of Soldiers in Heaven, or Soldier of Heaven, sorry, and you have this song. Like, it's that derivative and dull and completely, like, it's a waste of space in the track list is what it is, because it adds nothing, it contributes nothing, and might as well just not be there, all things considered. The next one is called Lady of the Dark, and is one that I actually quite liked, because for whatever reason, I'm not sure what it is, this track just comes across so much more slick and re-energized than a lot of what's on this album, because I don't really know what it is. It might be to do with the guitar, the fact that it kind of sounds a bit staccato and maybe a bit cleaner adds to that very slick presentation, but it just sounds so much less drab than a lot of the other songs on here. Like, again, it's not too dissimilar in sound, but I absolutely love this one. Like, again, the guitars are very effective because they have a very kind of clean, yet also very full and very rich sound to them. The vocals sound very expressive, yet still kind of maintaining that general gravelly tone. The chorus is very dramatic, but done in a way where it doesn't kind of just sound like it's retreading the same ground. Like, there are the kind of similar synth bells and whistles that you get with a Sabaton chorus, but kind of done in a way where it doesn't sound just like it's going through the motions over and over like the last track did. And I think more than any other track on here, aside from the opener and a few that I'll get onto in a second, this one really has a lyrical theme that sticks out, because it might be that I'm not a history buff, but a lot of their lyrics, if you don't know what he's talking about, and I did do some research and kind of look into what they are talking about, but if you don't, it can just kind of feel like a load of random war imagery thrown together into lyrics. But this one definitely does have a more distinctive lyrical angle, which I believe is about a key woman soldier fighting in World War I, which was obviously an oddity, and so them kind of highlighting this is quite cool and does give the track a very unique aura, which it already did kind of possess through, again, that more kind of slick instrumental on here. So it's pretty good on all fronts, to be honest. And yeah, the solos are getting pretty old, but to be honest, when you have a track this good, I don't really care too much. The next track is The Valley of Death, and is another one that I really liked, because I do really enjoy how they really let the synths take centre stage on here, because normally the synths are used either as just like an embellishment on the chorus or as like kind of subtle backing textures, whereas here they really let them take centre stage over the guitar, which I think is a very nice change and actually one that serves the track in its favour. I almost think that it kind of sounds like maybe a power metal version of a Sonic soundtrack almost, in a way, which is definitely not a bad thing, because Sonic has some killer soundtracks. But again, I think it's kind of like the last track where the instrumentals and the vocals here just feel much more invigorated, or reinvigorated I should say, and much more lively and energetic and kind of more urgent than they did earlier, which is a very nice change of pace. And that's especially evident on the chorus too, because there are some really nice catchy riffs here, both from the synths and the guitar. The drumming is fairly full pelt, but not so dramatic or fast or wanky that it kind of puts you off. The vocals aren't doing loads and loads and loads to overwhelm you, but they still definitely do have that definable presence, which I like a lot. And again, the instrumental and just the general song, I suppose, does have, again, that very militant kind of mechanical feel, but not in a kind of wanky meshuggah like math metal, like trying to work out riffs to the tune of pi, whatever, that kind of, you know, that really kind of wanky mathematical stuff that can often come off really kind of cold and machine-like and calculated. This one feels mechanical in the way that it just sounds like a really well-oiled machine doing what it does best. And if anything, this track is that, just Sabaton doing what they do best, and that's why I love it. The penultimate track is called Christmas Truce, and is one that honestly I was kind of disappointed by, because this is probably my favourite World War I related story. I mean, I know we've all got a tier list, but you know, this is my top one, mostly because it like actually displays the good side of humanity rather than the one that kills people constantly for 4 years at a time. But I mean, that aside, me getting all hippie-ish aside, I do think that this track kind of is symptomatic of when a song maybe tries to do too much and doesn't do it all that well, because for starters, the combination of the grand piano and the church bells in the intro is an interesting one, certainly, at least from a Sonic perspective, but I do think it sounds maybe a little too glossy and overproduced, which I guess can sort of be the case when you try to implement a grand piano in this way, and especially church bells, or at least bell style synths. It does kind of come off a little bit, again, glossy and kind of tacky in a way. And I've always said that you have to be very, very careful with grand piano in metal, because when you have that thing hammering away with a very distinctive timbre to it as an instrument, or timbre, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but it has a very distinctive sound to it as an instrument. So when you're banging away on a piano alongside guitar riffs and drum beats, it can come off a little bit clumsy and awkward, which unfortunately this track does kind of suffer from. And I think musically this track is also kind of odd in that to my ears it kind of sounds like a weird history inspired power metal style Meatloaf parody in a weird way, just with the kind of grand way that it presents itself, and the kind of maybe it's the way that the track is structured, like the shifts between verses and choruses maybe sounds a little bit weird to my ears. But it just, I think this track, again, it tries to do too much. Like, it tries to have like grand pianos and church bells and weird instrumental shifts and structural shifts, and you know, it just, I feel like it should have maybe tried to pare it down a little bit, or maybe gone in a bit more of a power ballad direction, and rather than trying to force a kind of power metal direction in this, because you could have gone down the power ballad route and done perfectly well. Look at Powerwolf as a prime example of that, right? They've had power ballads on the past two of their albums, and those have easily been two of my favourite songs on both of those albums that I heard them from, so that's definitely a place to go from. But I think here it's kind of like forcing a square peg into a round hole, but before you force it into the round hole, you kind of bejazzle it with a lot of like weird diamonds and gemstones and stuff, so it just looks really tacky beforehand and you can't even get it in. I'm not even sure what metaphor I'm trying to go with here, but I think I've made my point. But as a final note, because I completely forgot to say everything that I actually like about the song, so here's a bit of a break from the negativity for you, I do think that the riff complemented with the orchestra and the choir in the second verse is very, very nice and goes over sonically very well, and is easily one of the track's catchier moments, as is the bridge, which has a very nice kind of 80s synth style led bit that is almost in a sort of waltz time signature, so it gives it a very odd swaying groove, but I do think it works very, very well as a kind of moment of drama and bombast in the track, so it's definitely not all bad, just mostly. And with that, we've reached the final track, fittingly named Versailles, which I think is actually a very good closer, at the very least from a conceptual standpoint, and from a few others too, but the way this track is orchestrated is absolutely fantastic, because this thing is cyclical structure to a T, because we started off with Sarajevo at the start of the album, which detailed the beginning of the war, and obviously now Versailles details the end of the First World War, which I think is a very smart way of doing things, and it really ties the theme together of the album, which is very, very smart. What also is very smart is almost a reuse of a whole instrumental portion, or I think it might be slightly different, but the way it's done isn't a kind of thing where I was like, oh, they just recycled the same instruments, that's lazy. No, they actually did something very, very nice, because again, the army drum backed kind of orchestral instrumental here is very effective, as is the reintroduction of the voiceover, which adds again that extra layer of drama and kind of introspection that you want on a track like this. And as opposed to the first track, I actually think having the voiceover handle both the verses is way more effective here than it was on the first track. I don't know, something about the first track felt like it should have some like regular verses, whereas here I think having the spoken word vocals on both verses actually helps to kind of drive the more emotional tinge of this track home, because obviously the end of the war is more of a time for introspection than the beginning of it was, so having the spoken word vocals be in both verses makes much more sense here. And I do also think that, as well as explaining the narrative, the bit where the narrator kind of goes into a bit more an introspective general statement on the nature of war and humanity is very, very tasteful and very well done. Although my main issues with this track actually are to do with the band themselves, because while I do like the chorus in the outro, I mean there's like an alternate chorus in the outro that I think goes over very well, the actual main chorus on here is really grating because the melody is very, very awkward. I mean, I get that they're trying to go for this really dramatic, grand ending statement, but the melody that they sing, because it's so high up and so like jolly and gleeful, it really is kind of a like ache to my ears. Like, it just sounds way too over the top and kind of grating and annoying, which is obviously not the effect they were going for, but it doesn't sound great to my ears personally. Yeah, like I feel like it's just maybe trying a bit too hard to be grand, if you see what I'm saying. Like, they could lay back a bit and like let the emotional tone of the verses carry it a little bit, but I feel like with the chorus they went a little overboard. And while I do like the switch to another chorus in the outro, the fade out goes on for way too long, because this chorus is literally just the same thing for about a minute and a half, slowly fading out very, very slowly. Like, the last 40 seconds are completely redundant, as you can just tell that it's fading out, just doing it very, very slowly, and so feels kind of like a waste of time. But I think as a closer, both conceptually, structurally, in a lot of ways, is very, very effective. It's just a shame that the chorus had to kind of let it down a little bit. So, what did I think of Sabaton's brand new album, The War to End All Wars? Well, I like the concept of it, I like the conceptual nature of it, I like the added bits of drama in the opening and closing tracks and throughout the album, honestly, and I do think it has easily some of Sabaton's best songs in a while, if not some of the best that I've heard from them, period. But there is only a few, and that's probably my main issue, is that it does have some absolutely blindingly bright spots, but for the most part it just feels kind of dull. Like, it's kind of, I don't know whether this is just a problem with me reviewing power metal, because this seems to be a recurring trend where like most of it is okay, but there's only really 2 or 3 select tracks that I can pluck out and go, now that is something special, you know? And I feel like for it to be a truly great album, you should be able to do that with the majority of tracks, whereas here there are a few good ones, and I do think the more dramatic conceptual nature of it definitely works in its favour, but for the most part a lot of the album just kind of falls a bit flat, whether it feels a bit drab or slightly low energy, or just like it feels as if Sabaton are kind of going through the motions a little bit at a few moments here. It just doesn't quite have the same I don't really know. Like, the last stand, I've only heard about maybe 4 or 5 tracks from that, but all of those I could say were standouts, and given that I think there's only about 10, 11, 12 tracks on that album as well, I could probably say that I would enjoy that more, whereas here, the kind of more dramatic, catchy qualities to their music seems to have been dialed down ever so slightly, which I don't quite understand how or why that is, to be honest, but it just kind of left me wanting more, if I'm honest, because, like, again, as I say, there are good moments here, just they are kind of few and far between. And as for Sabaton's albums, it did also kind of, you know, confirm my suspicions that they aren't really an album band, all things considered. So if I had to give a score, it's probably like a decent 5. Like, again, there were some good standout moments here, but for the most part, a lot of it just felt a bit flat or a bit repetitive or monotonous. But the bits that were good were really, really good. So they've got that going for them, definitely. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. I'm so sorry for the lack of uploads. I don't know why it happened. I think there was a few albums that came out and I'm like, okay, I'll make notes for those and I'll maybe leave them for a little bit and then go and review them all. And then, oh God, I look at my channel and oh no, I haven't uploaded in 3 weeks. And so now I am doing it now. So I apologise for the gaps in uploads. As for the review schedule, there should be another review coming out either a week or just under a week from when this goes up. That will be the horror album review. Then after that, with hopefully less than a week's gap, we will have a review of the brand new Hardy Fox album, which I am very excited for because you can't get it on streaming services. So I'm quite excited to give a comprehensive review of that. And then on the 8th of April, I believe it is, we've got a new album from K Tempest. Very excited for that because some of the teaser tracks have been particularly strong, so I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, just a few reviews coming out. I think it is mostly reviews for the time being. There are a few other more fun things that I've got planned, some collaborations both on mine and on other people's channels. Hopefully some more episodes of the Not So Forensic Record Society coming down the line. So, you know, I'm trying to get back on the wagon with this upload and kind of, you know, start the ball rolling again, so to speak. So keep your eyes peeled and I'll see you all later.